Before you hear the rest of this, I want you to do something very specific. Think of one moment when your child clearly needed help, and instead of coming to you, they tried to handle it alone. Maybe they lied and said everything was fine. Maybe they hid the bad grade. Maybe they stayed up all night stressing about something they could have told you in 30 seconds. Maybe they asked a friend for advice that was obviously terrible instead of asking you. Hold that moment in your mind, because before this video ends, there is a very good chance you will realize the issue was never that your child did not need you. The issue was that needing you did not feel safe enough in that moment. And once you understand that, you start seeing parenting in a very different way. Because most children do not stop asking parents for help because they suddenly become independent, dramatic, spoiled, or secretive for no reason. They stop asking when help starts feeling emotionally expensive. That is the part almost nobody says out loud. A child is not always thinking, "Who can solve this best?" Very often they are thinking, "Who can hear this without making me feel worse?" And that single question quietly decides where the child takes their real life. To a parent, to a friend, to the internet, to a secret, to silence. That is why some children live in loving homes and still carry huge things alone. Not because there is no love, because love and emotional safety are not always the same experience. A parent can deeply care and still feel hard to come to. A parent can sacrifice everything and still feel impossible to be honest with. A parent can be responsible, involved, protective, and present, and still accidentally teach a child one devastating lesson. When I'm struggling, I become harder to love here. That lesson changes everything. Because children do not just need guidance. They need somewhere safe to fall before they are ready to stand back up. And if home stops feeling like that place, they begin making private decisions. I'll fix it myself. I'll hide it until I can't. I'll say less. I'll tell the easy version. I'll ask someone else. I'll pretend I don't care. I'll deal with it alone. That is how parent-child distance starts growing, while everything on the outside still looks normal. The child still goes to school, still eats dinner, still answers basic questions, still says, "Sure, okay, nothing, I'm good, don't worry." But under that surface, the real life of the child is moving somewhere else. The first reason kids stop asking parents for help is that help starts feeling like a loss of control. This happens every day in ordinary homes. A child admits they're struggling. The parent takes over. Now there are 10 questions. Now there is a plan. Now there is concern. Now there is a look. Now there is follow-up. Now there is checking in every hour. Now the problem no longer belongs to the child. It belongs to the whole household. And yes, parents do this out of love. But children often experience it as emotional invasion. Because sometimes asking for help is already humiliating enough. Now imagine adding interrogation, disappointment, fear, monitoring, and a whole family mood shift on top of that. That is why so many children decide it is easier to drown quietly than to ask for a life vest that comes with a documentary crew. The parent thinks, "I'm stepping in." The child feels, "I just lost ownership of my inner world." And once that happens a few times, they stop reaching. Not because they are stronger, because they are protecting the last bit of control they still have. The second reason kids stop asking for help is that parents often react to the child's emotion before understanding the child's problem. A child says, "School is awful." The parent hears laziness. A teen says, I don't want to go. The parent hears attitude. A child says, I'm tired. The parent hears excuses. A teen says, I can't deal with this. The parent hears drama. And once the child feels misread in the first 10 seconds, the door starts closing immediately. Because children can survive not being solved right away, what they struggle with is not being understood right away. That is the deepest difference. A child who feels understood may still be upset, but they stay in the relationship. A child who feels misread starts defending themselves from the relationship. Now the conversation is no longer about the real issue. Now it is about proving the feeling is real. And once children have to fight to establish reality, asking for help starts to feel exhausting. So they stop. They stop because they do not want to explain the pain and defend the pain at the same time. They stop because they do not want every bad day turned into a character flaw. They stop because the first layer of support they need is simple emotional contact, and instead they get correction, interpretation, or suspicion. The third reason kids stop asking parents for help is that parents often make the room too emotionally heavy for small truth. A child says something hard, the whole atmosphere changes, the face changes, the tone changes, the evening changes. Dinner gets weird. The car gets quiet. The house feels heavier. Children notice this instantly, and once they learn that honesty changes the whole emotional weather of the room, they begin protecting the room from the truth. That sounds backwards, but it happens all the time. Children do not want to ruin the mood. They do not want to be the reason mom looks worried all night. They do not want to be the reason dad gets quiet and disappointed. They do not want one awkward situation at school to become the emotional headline of the family for the next 6 hours. So what do? They edit. They wait. They soften. They hide. They say it's not a big deal. They say they forgot. They say they handled it. They say nothing. And parents often mistake this for dishonesty, when many times it is emotional protection. The child is not protecting the mistake. They are protecting everyone from the emotional intensity that tends to arrive after the mistake is revealed. The fourth reason children stop asking for help is that they get advice before they get understanding. This one is so common that most parents do not even realize they are doing it. A child says, I'm overwhelmed. The parent says, make a schedule. A teen says, my friends are being weird. The parent says, ignore them. A child says, I think I messed everything up. The parent says, you need to be more responsible. A teen says, I feel ugly. The parent says, don't say that. You're beautiful. And yes, all of that sounds supportive on the surface. But what does the child actually feel? I brought you my pain, and you immediately started moving me away from it. That creates loneliness fast. Because children do not calm down fastest when someone leaps over their feeling to get to the lesson. They calm down faster when they feel that someone can stay beside the feeling without panicking, correcting, or optimizing it. That is why so many kids go to friends instead of parents. Not because the friends are wiser, usually they are not. Not because the friends care more, usually they do not. But because the emotional entry fee is lower. A friend may say, wow, that sucks. A parent may say, why didn't you do this differently? One response creates relief. The other creates self-surveillance. And children remember that difference. The fifth reason kids stop asking for help is shame. Not always big, obvious shame, not public humiliation, not screaming. Sometimes it is quieter than that. A sigh, a sarcastic laugh, a disappointed face, a too long pause. A line like, "I can't believe you did that." A line like, "You should know better." A line like, "We've talked about this." A line like, "What were you thinking?" A line like, "Seriously." Adults often think these are small reactions. Children experience them much bigger, because when a child comes to you for help, especially with something embarrassing, they are already standing in a vulnerable place. Their dignity is already shaky. Their confidence is already low. If the first thing they feel from you is shame, even mild shame, they remember it. And once shame gets attached to help-seeking, many children stop help-seeking. They do not become wiser, they become quieter. They start thinking, next time I'll solve it before anyone knows. Next time I'll delete the message. Next time I'll hide the grade. Next time I'll say, I'm just tired. Next time I won't ask. That is how isolation grows in children who are technically not alone. The sixth reason kids stop asking parents for help is that parents often want emotional clarity before the child even understands their own experience. This happens especially with teens. Why are you upset? What exactly happened? What did they say? What did you say back? Are you anxious? Are you depressed? Are you being bullied? Are you hiding something? Tell me what's going on. To an adult, this feels caring. To a teen who is already overwhelmed, it can feel like being forced to give a press conference while your brain is still buffering. Many kids do not hide because they are deceitful. They hide because they do not yet have a clean explanation. They only know that something feels bad, something feels wrong, something feels heavy. Something about today got under their skin. Something about school, friendship, rejection, body image, performance, embarrassment, or comparison is hurting, and they do not know how to package it into a calm, coherent report for adult consumption. So they say nothing, or I don't know, or leave me alone, or it's whatever. And parents often hear disrespect. But what many children are actually saying is, I can't explain this fast enough to survive your questions. If this is hitting close to home, leave a comment with one real-life moment when your child clearly needed help, but instead of coming to you directly, they hid it, minimized it, or tried to deal with it alone. Just one honest example. Because that moment happens in far more families than people admit, and most parents don't realize how common it is until someone says it out loud. The seventh reason children stop asking for help is that some parents confuse problem-solving with closeness. A parent thinks, if my child is struggling, I need to act, I need to fix, I need to move, I need to teach, I need to respond with something useful immediately. But closeness and usefulness are not always the same thing. A child may need strategy later. What they often need first is company. Not company in the form of more words. Company in the form of emotional steadiness. Someone who does not panic. Someone who does not make them feel ridiculous. Someone who does not take over too quickly. Someone who does not turn the problem into a speech, a moral, a family pattern, a warning about the future, and a reflection on all the sacrifices adults make these days. Children go where their nervous system feels most held. That is the truth. And if they do not feel held with you, they will still go somewhere. Maybe not somewhere wise, but somewhere. The eighth reason kids stop asking parents for help is that they start believing help comes with a price. The price may be privacy. The price may be freedom. The price may be being watched differently afterward. The price may be having the issue brought up again next week. The price may be becoming the child with the problem. The price may be that once they say it out loud, the parent never fully looks at them the same way for a while. This is especially true with teens. Teens are not only trying to feel safe, they are trying to feel intact. They are trying to keep dignity, identity, and some sense of authorship over their own life, while still being young enough to need support. So when help feels like emotional takeover, they start choosing secrecy over exposure. And then parents say, "Why didn't you come to me?" Because many children are silently asking a very different question. If I come to you, do I still stay myself? Or do I become a project? That question changes everything. Because the moment a child feels like asking for help turns them into a problem to be managed, their instinct is no longer openness, it is self-protection. And this is where many parent-child relationships start to drift into a painful pattern. The parent becomes more worried. The child becomes more private. The parent becomes more intrusive. The child becomes more selective. The parent says, "You can tell me anything." The child hears, "Yes, but I know what happens after I do." That is the fracture. Not in love, in felt safety. And that is also the doorway to repair. Because if children learn to stop reaching through patterns, they can also learn to reach again through patterns. Not through one giant speech, not through one emotional family meeting, not through one perfect apology. Through repeated moments where your response starts costing them less, where your face gets safer, where your tone gets steadier, where your questions get fewer and cleaner, where your help starts feeling less like takeover and more like support, where they feel that asking for help does not automatically mean losing dignity, privacy, or control. That is when the relationship begins to change. And this is where many parents finally run into the truth they were never really prepared for. Their child is not only deciding whether to ask for help based on love, they are deciding based on what help feels like in your presence. Does help feel like relief? Or does it feel like exposure? Does help feel like being supported? Or does it feel like becoming a problem? Does help feel like safety? Or does it feel like giving up control, privacy, dignity, and emotional breathing room all at once? That is the real question underneath so many parent-child relationships. Because children do not stop needing help. They stop believing help is emotionally survivable. And when that happens, something very painful begins to grow. The child splits into two versions: the outside version that looks manageable, and the inside version that carries the real burden alone. The outside version says, "Fine." The inside version is panicking. The outside version says, "I forgot." The inside version is ashamed. The outside version says, "It's not a big deal." The inside version feels overwhelmed. The outside version says, "I handled it." The inside version is drowning quietly and hoping nobody notices. This is why some children look mature when they are actually isolated. They seem private, independent, maybe even strong. But underneath that calm surface is often a child who has simply learned that needing support costs too much. Too many questions, too much disappointment, too much emotional intensity, too much change in the atmosphere, too much risk of being seen differently afterward. And if that sounds dramatic, think about how many adults still struggle to ask for help from people they love. Not because they do not need support, but because some part of them still expects help to come with shame, control, emotional debt, or loss of dignity. That pattern often starts very early. It starts when a child reaches once and regrets it, then reaches again and regrets it again, and eventually decides it is easier to struggle in private than to open a door that always seems to make the whole house heavier. That is when parents start noticing distance. My child tells friends things they do not tell me. My teen acts like they do not need me. They hide small problems until they become big ones. They only tell me things after I find out another way. They say they are fine when they are clearly not fine. And the painful part is that many parents respond to that distance with more pressure, more checking, more questions, more speeches, more concern, more monitoring, more urgency. But if the real problem is that help already feels intrusive, then more pressure does not create openness, it creates retreat. This is why so many children do not become more honest under intensity. They become more strategic. They tell you the cleaned-up version, the shortened version, the version that avoids follow-up, the version that protects their dignity, the version that keeps your emotional reaction manageable. And parents often call that lying. Sometimes it is lying, but often it is something deeper. It is a child managing the emotional cost of being known. That phrase matters. The emotional cost of being known. In healthy relationships, that cost is low enough that truth can still move. In strained relationships, that cost keeps rising until children start hiding not because they are rebellious, but because honesty has become 2G day. And this is why emotional safety matters so much in parenting, not as some soft, trendy phrase, as a practical reality. A child who feels emotionally safe with a parent is more likely to ask sooner, to admit earlier, to tell the smaller truth before it becomes a bigger mess, to tolerate guidance, to survive correction, to come back after mistakes. A child who does not feel emotionally safe may still look functional. They may still achieve, still smile, still joke, still move through life, but their inner world will increasingly be built somewhere else. And that is what many parents are really grieving when they say, "I miss my child." They do not only miss the younger version, they miss access. They miss being the place their child came to first. So how does that access come back? Not through perfect parenting. Not through becoming permissive, not through acting like problems do not matter, and not through one dramatic conversation where everyone says the right things and suddenly becomes emotionally healed forever. It comes back through pattern. Children trust patterns. Patterns of what happens when they are not okay. Patterns of what your face does when they tell the truth. Patterns of what your voice sounds like when they disappoint you. Patterns of whether your concern becomes steadiness or control. If the pattern begins to change, the child notices. If your first reaction becomes calmer, they notice. If your questions become less loaded, they notice. If your help starts feeling less like takeover and more like partnership, they notice. If your tone protects dignity even when you are holding a boundary, they notice. If the emotional weather of the house becomes more survivable when truth enters the room, they notice. That is when children begin to test the relationship again. Not in huge confessions, usually in tiny risks. A slightly more honest answer. A small admission. A quiet question. A moment of visible stress they would have hidden before. A sentence like, "Can I tell you something? But don't get mad." And those moments matter enormously. Because the child is not only asking for help, they are asking, is this relationship becoming safer for the truth? That is the real test. And this is where many parents accidentally miss the opportunity. The child finally opens the door a little, and the parent rushes through it too hard. "What happened? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Who else knows? How long has this been going on? Why would you do that? You should have come to me. What were you thinking?" And the child instantly regrets telling you. That regret is what has to change. Because when children regret openness, they retreat. When children survive openness with dignity, they return. That is the whole game. Not perfection. Return. Can your child return to you after embarrassment? After mistakes? After shame? After fear? After being seen not at their best? If the answer is yes, trust grows. If the answer is no, distance grows. This is why one of the strongest things a parent can say in a hard moment is something like this. I'm glad you told me. We'll deal with it. You're not alone in it. I'm not ignoring it, and I'm not going to crush you with it either. Let's figure out what you need first. We can solve this without making you feel smaller. That kind of response changes the nervous system, because now the child feels two things at once. This matters, and I still belong. That combination is incredibly powerful. Children can handle a lot when belonging stays intact. What becomes unbearable is when a problem also threatens connection, dignity, or identity. That is when asking for help starts to feel dangerous. Now let's go deeper, because this part matters more than most people realize. Many parents do not only react to the child's struggle, they react to what the struggle means inside themselves. A bad grade may not just feel like a bad grade. It may feel like failure, fear, lost potential, your own childhood shame, your own panic about the future. A teen pulling away may not just feel like normal development. It may feel like rejection, helplessness, grief, the loss of closeness, the fear that you are disappearing from your own child's life. A child hiding something may not just feel inconvenient. It may hit your deepest fear that the relationship is slipping beyond your reach. And when those fears take over, help stops feeling like help. It becomes control, urgency, or emotional overreaction wearing the mask of care. That is why self-awareness is so essential in parenting. Not because you need to become endlessly calm, not because you have to be perfect, but because children should not have to pay for emotional alarms that were not created by them. When you notice, my fear is taking over, you create room. Room not to panic. Room not to interrogate. Room not to make the moment bigger than the child can bear. Room to respond to the real need instead of only to your own fear. That pause may be one of the most loving acts in parenting. Because once you pause, you can lead. And leadership is different from control. Control says, I need this discomfort gone right now. Leadership says, I can stay steady inside this discomfort long enough to guide it well. Control personalizes the child's struggle. Leadership makes space for the child's struggle. Control takes over. Leadership supports without erasing the child. Control often makes the child smaller. Leadership protects dignity while holding the line. That difference determines whether help feels safe. And yes, children still need rules. They need structure. They need accountability. They need parents who can say no and mean it. But none of those things require making help feel humiliating. A child can hear, this needs to change, and still feel safe. A child can face a consequence and still feel respected. A teen can be told, this is serious, and still feel that asking for help was the right decision. That is what strong parenting sounds like. Not weak, not permissive, not chaotic. Clear, steady, respectful, and emotionally survivable. And this is where repair becomes so important. Because every parent gets this wrong sometimes. Every good parent gets it wrong. You will overreact. You will ask too many questions. You will make a moment heavier than it needed to be. You will let your fear turn into pressure. That is human. The danger is not imperfection. The danger is what the child learns after the imperfection. If the parent becomes defensive, the child learns that honesty is still unsafe. If the parent repairs, the child learns something completely different. I made that harder to tell me than I should have. You came to me and I reacted too strongly. I let my fear take over. I still care about the issue, but I don't want asking for help to feel dangerous with me. You did the right thing by telling me. I want to handle it better next time. That kind of repair is powerful, because now the child learns that your love is not only strong when things are easy, it is strong enough to look at itself, strong enough to change, strong enough to stay in relationship without pretending you handled the moment perfectly. That builds more trust than many parents realize. Because children do not need flawless adults, they need trustworthy ones. And trustworthy adults are not the ones who never get scared. They are the ones who do not make the child carry the full weight of that fear. If this video is helping you see your child and your role in a different light, subscribe to the channel and share this with one person who truly cares about parenting, child psychology, and the hidden reasons children stop reaching for help. Not because families need more perfect advice, but because so many loving parents are accidentally making support feel heavier than silence. Because once you understand this pattern, you cannot unsee it. You hear that "I'm fine" may mean "I don't trust what happens if I'm not." You hear that "I handled it" may mean "I was too scared to bring this to you." You hear that "it's not a big deal" may mean "I know this will become emotionally huge if I say more." You hear that independence may not always be strength. Sometimes it is loneliness wearing a mature face, and that changes the whole conversation. You stop asking only, "Why didn't my child ask for help?" And you start asking, "What has help felt like here lately? Has it felt calm or costly? Has it felt containing or invasive? Has it felt respectful or identity-threatening? Has it felt like guidance or like being turned into a project?" That question reveals everything. Because the goal is not to raise a child who never struggles. The goal is not even to raise a child who tells you everything. The deeper goal is this. When your child is scared, ashamed, overwhelmed, confused, socially hurt, or in trouble, does your presence make reaching easier or harder? That is what decides whether they come to you next time. That is what decides whether truth comes early or late. That is what decides whether help feels like shelter or exposure. And in the end, that may be one of the greatest gifts a parent can give. Not constant solutions, not perfect words, not total control. But a relationship where asking for help does not feel like losing yourself. Because when a child knows they can come to you without being swallowed by the reaction, something beautiful begins to happen. They ask sooner. They hide less. They trust more. They recover faster. And little by little, home becomes what it was always meant to be. Not a place where children perform strength. A place where they can bring weakness, confusion, mistakes, and pain, and still feel safe enough to stay real.